Good afternoon. We are going to start our keynote address in a little while. This has been a very eventful day for us. In the morning, we had a very productive, I would say, panel discussion on predatory journals. We had our guest speakers from Carnegie Mellon, IUP, Pitt, and from RMU. And we also live streamed those in the morning activities. We also had a successful poster presentation. I think most of the posters are still up. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, maybe after the keynote speech, you can still do so. But what we're going to do now is we're going to start our keynote speech, and I'd like to introduce our speaker. I did take him around the poster venues, introduce you to some of you to him. But let me introduce you to Dr. Rasu Shrestha. He's the Chief Innovation Officer of UPMC. In this role, Dr. Shrestha is responsible for driving UPMC's innovation strategy. He also serves as Executive Vice President of UPMC Enterprises, pushing the needle in the pursuit of unique blend of healthcare intelligence, technology expertise, and entrepreneurial drive to develop inventive and commercially successful solutions that address complex healthcare challenges. He was recently recognized as 26 of the smartest people in health IT by Becker's Hospital Review and was acknowledged as one of the top 20 health IT leaders driving change and as a top healthcare innovator by Information Week. On a personal note, for both Dr. Shrestha and me, Nepal is a country of origin. We're native of Nepal. And I must say, Dr. Shrestha is very actively involved in our community activity. In fact, he's one of our success stories in our community. Let me welcome my friend, my brother, Dr. Shrestha, to talk about innovation and research in the context of medical IT in general and UPMC in specific. Let's welcome Dr. Shrestha.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you've all had your lunch and you're ready for not just food, but food for thought around innovation and the topic of what we need to do really in leveraging what I call the innovation imperative. So thank you, Dr. Acharya, for inviting me to keynote in today's session here. It's an absolute pleasure. I've been here in Pittsburgh for close to 10 years now, and it's really my first time speaking at RMU, so it's an absolute pleasure. I'm a big believer in building bridges. I joke around with people that that's the reason I came to Pittsburgh, because we have so many bridges here. So hopefully we'll be able to build more bridges into RMU, and really take on the task of innovating together. I pulled together a couple of stories for you to talk about the perspective that I bring to the table around innovation. I'm a physician by background, so I'm in the space of innovation in healthcare. But innovation in healthcare in this day and age in 2017 is really about leveraging leadership, leveraging data and analytics, leveraging engineering capabilities, and really challenging the status quo. So I'll talk about how we're doing things, what I see in the industry, and what I believe are some of the things that we need to be doing together as we build more bridges. In this graph, I describe the inflection point, right? And this is true for a lot of institutions. This is true personally for lots of individuals, entrepreneurs, physicians, scientists, researchers, as we're contemplating papers that we're writing, as we're contemplating the work that we're doing. And we have a seed period and a period of growth. And then comes this inflection point, right? This inflection point where you either continue to then decline, or if you do a couple of things right, and if you're able to really leverage and be aware of your surroundings, be aware of the value that you're bringing, and define the right sorts of synergies, you're potentially able to enjoy an exponential growth. And that's where we are when it comes to innovation in the healthcare realm. So I'll talk a little bit about how we need to identify what that inflection point is and what we can do to really capitalize on that inflection point and march on upwards through that exponential growth as well. So this is really the menu for our post-lunch session today. I'll talk about IT versus innovation. So there's a lot of information technology and innovation, but really it's also two different mindsets. One, in a nutshell, is about keeping the trains on track in large parts, and the other is really about saying, all right, where's this train going? Should we be on a train? Should we be on a hovercraft? You know, so there's a lot of synergies that needs to be leveraged as far as that's concerned. So I'll talk about some of the challenges, the roles. I'll tell you about the UPMC approach and how we're really capitalizing on innovation and really taking healthcare to a whole different level altogether. The format, I really want this to be conversational. I would like to, if there are points that you disagree with on me, just feel free to raise your hands or just stand up or throw something at me. But I really want for this to be conversational. And we'll have a discussion on what you think your priorities, and is there alignment? Are there things that we might be able to even do together? So I do have a colleague here. I'll just give a quick shout out, Nick. He'll be available in an adjacent room. Nick, if you could just stand up and say hi. So Nick's from talent recruitment at UPMC and UPMC Enterprises, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And part of what I'd love to do is build bridges directly into RMU, and if there are graduating students and others that are really interested to perhaps work on some of the innovations that we're pushing forward as we're reinventing healthcare, then Nick's your guy, and you might just want to pop in and say hi to him at the end of the session. So the first chapter, I really wanted to talk about what I call old world versus new world. Right, and when we talk about information technology and healthcare, the impact of information technology in healthcare, the old world isn't, this isn't the 16th century. We're not talking about, centuries old. We're talking about the last maybe 20 years versus today in 2017. Right, so I think there are a number of things that we need to comprehend. But as a physician that's also leading the charge in innovation, one of the things that I'll tell you is we really focus on patients. We really focus on people. So how many of you here are in healthcare? All right, well, that's a good number. The truth of the matter is all of us around the hall are actually in healthcare. We're all consumers of healthcare. We all have loved ones who've marched through the challenges of healthcare. We all have to consume healthcare in some way or form. So we're all in healthcare. We're all in this together. And when we're innovating, when we're thinking about challenging the status quo and saying, all right, how do we take it from where it is to where it really needs to be, we think about all of us first, all of the people that we think about in terms of our friends and relatives and loved ones and people who come to us to get care. And I like to draw analogies to this picture here and this here. Right? We're all snowflakes in large parts. If you think about even just, the short period of time that we're here in this world, it's a very transitionary sort of an event. We're here for a couple of decades, if we're lucky, for maybe a century, maybe a little bit more. And it's very transitionary, right? So much like snowflakes, they're just here for a period of time. When you look at us individually, we're very different from each other. When you look at us, however, collectively, it's very similar. All snowflakes look very similar. And it's beautiful. On a winter day, you're looking outside and the snowflakes are falling down, and it's really beautiful. And I draw analogies to how the human life is extremely beautiful as well. And if you look at us collectively, we're the human being. We're this tribe of human beings that are here trying to do great things and trying to really do the things that we've been tasked with. But if you look at us individually under a microscope, we're all very different. So if you look at the genotypic makeup, our genomics, we're very different. The way that certain types of medicines interact with us are very different person to person. This N of 1 that we call it, we're very different, but at the same time, there are groups of individuals. So there are groups of diabetics. There are groups of patients who come to us with congestive heart failure, right? So we have what we call population health, where we look at large snowflakes of individuals and say, all right, what's in common? How do we leverage data and machine learning and pattern recognition to draw out the similarities between those patients who all have diabetes? And then we look at, under a microscope, that one snowflake, that one individual, and say, all right, what are the specific biomarkers that this one patient has that would make it more effective for this patient to be on a certain drug regimen versus anyone else? Right, so it really is this balance between precision medicine, which is really looking at genomics and looking at us under a microscope, to population health, which is looking at large troves of patients, all of the snowflakes that we are in this transitionary journey that we call life. So that was hope, right? So there's a lot of hope in healthcare, and I like to talk about how, we need to really balance out the hope versus the hype. So how many of you have seen the Gartner hype cycle? Yeah, so Gartner is a group that publishes reports, and this is one example of their hype cycle. And they have multiple reports and hype cycles that come out. This is the Emerging Technologies Hype Cycle. And in this are multiple technologies that you're probably familiar with or you've heard about. Things like machine learning is right at the peak of inflated expectations. So that's that curve right at the top here. See things like machine learning, you'll see things like software-defined security, cognitive expert advisors. Climbing the slope are things like human augmentation and quantum computing. There's a lot of activities in quantum computing. Microsoft, for example, has invested a lot of money off late in the realm of quantum computing. And then there are other things that are coming to be more real. So if you look at the trough of disillusionment and then the slope of enlightenment, right, you'll see things like augmented reality and virtual reality. I was looking at the poster sessions earlier, and there was a discussion about VR or virtual reality around a hackathon that had recently transpired. So things like virtual reality are becoming real. My point in this chart is, if you look at the previous chart, there's a lot of hope in healthcare. All of us go and consume healthcare during perhaps the most trying times of our lives. We don't willingly today, by today's healthcare definition, we don't willingly go in to a hospital because we want to get a surgical procedure done, right? Or you've decided to have an accident today and you end up in the ED. You don't decide on that, right? So there's a lot of hope in healthcare, but there's also a lot of hype leveraging information technology. So how do you balance out the hope and the hype and bring it here, right? The hope to hype to here journey is really the conversation that we're having today about the inflection point. So today, this is where we are in healthcare. In the last 20 years, what we've managed to do, so the old world, is we've managed to really erect this wall, this digital wall that exists between the patient and the physician, right? And that's what we've done. So what we've done in large parts is we've implemented and created computerized information systems, electronic medical records, as they're called. And today, for a physician or for a nurse, we spend an awful lot of time interacting with our electronic medical record systems as opposed to interacting directly with our patients and talking to them about what their priorities are, right? So so in large parts, technology, although it's made us a lot more efficient, arguably, it's made us a lot more effective, arguably, it's also become an impediment because we're spending upwards of about 40% of our times entering notes into the electronic medical record system. So how do we really do better is something that I challenge my teams with. The electronic health record adoption has grown tremendously. And this is just in the last 6, 7, 8 years, up from 9% to about 90% adoption. So physician practices, hospitals across the board, and this is as a result of specific incentives that have been in place from the federal government, what's called meaningful use. So this is with the Affordable Care Act and with the meaningful use legislature in the last 8 years that actually President Bush started even before President Obama really put a lot of things into motion. And as a result of some of these incentives that have been out there, there's been a tremendous embrace of clinical information systems and this continuous march from paper charts and analog to now electronic medical record systems, electronic health record systems, and digital. So that's a good thing, but at the same time, as I mentioned, we're spending upwards of about 44% of our time entering notes into the electronic medical record system, not really talking to the patients, with our back oftentimes. So you might have experienced this in physician practices as well, because we have to enter these notes into the electronic medical record system. If we could more intelligently use technologies like voice recognition and chatbot type technologies and artificial intelligence, how would we reinvent healthcare, right? So these are some of the questions that I challenge my team with as well. So very quickly, I'll draw out a couple of quick old world versus new world scenarios. In the old world, i.e. in the last 20 years, we've really been designing for regulations. So there's a lot of regulations that exist in healthcare. We need to design for empowerment. How do we empower patients to better take charge of their data and of their health? How do we empower clinicians, physicians and nurses alike, to really take charge of the patient, take better care of the patient? Today, there's a lot of burnout. I don't know if you know this, but the rate of suicides amongst physicians and nurses is really skyrocketing in the last 5, 6, 10 years. And a lot of it is attributed to some of the complexity that exists in healthcare, but also some of the challenges that exist as a result of technology as we have it today. So how do we go from burnout to joy, right? I haven't seen a clinician go into a hospital saying, hey, I'm so joyous today because we're going live with a software patch. They don't do that. It just doesn't exist today. Today, innovation is about adding stuff. We add a lot of things. We add bells and whistles, we add buttons, we add tabs. Innovation should really be about simplifying. It should be about taking as much away as possible until the bare minimum is actually the most functional. Today, healthcare is a lot about bureaucracy. There's a lot of bureaucracy in healthcare, a lot of complexity in healthcare. And it should really be about meritocracy. So we're building systems that reward merit. So if you're enhancing the quality of care to that one patient or to the population of patients, the snowflakes, as I referenced earlier, then you will get rewarded more, right? So that really is sort of the new mindset that we're trying to push forward. Today, we're very focused on applications, and it really should be focused on patients. Today, we're very focused on interpretation. So is it a calcification, meaning it's just calcium in a, say, lung tissue? Or is it cancer? Because those are two different things, right? One is there's a speck of calcium in a nodule within your lung. The other is you've got cancer. And those are two different diagnoses. But today we're very focused just on that, when we should really be focused on outcomes. Okay, so now that you have cancer, we've determined that. How do we get you better? And how do we make sure that you're able to get out of the hospital in a much better state and stay at home and not have to come back to the hospital, really focusing on sort of a longer-term view on outcomes. So today, we're doing digital. That's what we've been doing. And what I say is it shouldn't just be about doing digital, meaning moving blindly from analog to digital. It should really be this mindset of being digital, right? How do we leverage these zeros and ones that we have in our databases, in our enterprise data warehouses, in our clinical information systems, in the smartphones of patients, of all of you, right? You have maybe wearables and Fitbit type devices that you have, and lots of data that you have that we don't have access to today. right? So today in the old world, we've been thinking about data as it pertains to our electronic health record system. But I believe that most of the data that we need to really look at treating you better and looking at the quality of care actually exists outside of hospitals. So your buying patterns, your shopping habits, your eating habits, your exercise habits, the zip code that you live in. I believe that the zip code is a stronger deterministic factor of well-being than even the genetic code. So the zip code versus the genetic code, right? So how do we get access to all of that data and really think about things from a digital perspective? So those are some of the challenging statements that I wanted to throw at you. But to bring you back to reality, I thought I'll talk to you about some of the challenges that exist in healthcare today. So I thought, since you're all in academia and we also have a number of students here, I'll throw out a top 5 list because I think, throwing out a list always helps. So number 1 is complexity, and I'll go into some of the details behind this. Number 2 is access to data. Number 3, security and privacy. So I know some of you are doing some interesting work in the space of security and privacy. Culture, I think, is really important. And then last but not least is new care models. How do we change the definition of what healthcare is really about? Which is an interesting notion, because not just for the last 20 years that we've been embracing information technology, but for centuries, healthcare has really been about getting better and not dying, which are two really great things. I would like not to die, and if I fall sick, I would like to get better, okay? But I really believe that healthcare shouldn't just be about surviving, which is what those two things are about, but it should really be about thriving, right? It shouldn't just be about getting better from an illness and getting out from that hospital. It should be about not getting into that hospital in the first place, right? And it's a different mindset, and it begs for different levels of innovation when you think about healthcare from that perspective. So that's my top 5 list. That chart, and I won't bore you to read it, is really a representation of the healthcare system as we have it today. So whether, whichever side of the aisle you're in, Obamacare or Trump care, Romney care as it was called some time back, it doesn't really matter. Healthcare today in the United States is extremely complex. So how do we simplify this is a big push that we're trying to make across the board. So simplification is critical, and that's a key part of innovation. Then there's this notion of managing change. So I'll run through this really quickly. I think you'll enjoy this exercise. I believe that when you manage complex change, you need a set of attributes. You need vision, you need skills, you need incentives, you need the right resources, right? Whether it's funding for your research projects or the right teams around you. And then last but not least, you need an action plan, because that's really critical. So you need all 5 of those things, though, not 4 out of 5. Not 3 out of 5. You need all 5 of those. And bear with me as I walk through this, right? Because when you have those 5 things, then you can have meaningful change, right? Because if you don't have vision and you have the rest of the 4 things, you end up with confusion. Do you agree? Yeah? If you don't have the skills, you have everything else. You've got great vision, you've got remarkable incentives, you're really well funded, or we're working with maybe an industry partner, you've got the right resources, you've got the right action plan. You have a lot of anxiety because you don't have the right skills in place and you're always anxious. If you don't have the right incentives, there's a lot of resistance to change. If you don't have the right resources, there's a lot of frustration. Right? You've got the right vision, you've got the right funding, you've got everything else, but there's a lot of frustration. And last but not least, if you don't have the right action plan, then there's a lot of false starts. You have the right motivation, you've got the right funding, you've got the right team, but then you don't have that action plan, and there's a lot of false starts, and you're not getting anywhere. You're doing a lot of things, but you're not getting anywhere. So it's really important when you're challenging the status quo and saying, all right, how do we make healthcare and really innovation and this approach that you're all taking more simple? It's really important for us to look at how you manage that change process as well. So change management is a key aspect of innovation done right. Access to data is really important. Today we have a lot of data. I talked about that earlier. But number one in terms of the challenges today is really accessing that data. Data is oftentimes locked away in proprietary standards with formats that don't talk to each other. So interoperability between these clinical information systems is really critical. I won't go through this pyramid, but at the bottom of the pyramid are really some of the foundational components of how we achieve better interoperability between information systems. And at the top of that pyramid is how do we leverage the data to get to meaningful insights? Because while we talk a lot about data and the importance of data and capturing data, it really isn't about data. It really is about moving data to information, and moving information to knowledge, and moving that knowledge and making it actionable at the point of decision making, right? Should I or should I not have that big pound of cake as my dessert? Should I or should I not work out this evening, or maybe I'll watch a ball game, right? Should I or should I not go in for my annual exam? So there are lots of decisions. If you can take the synthesis of all of that data that exists and really make it impactful, change behavior at the point of decision making, what would that do to impacting better outcomes? So security and privacy are really important. I won't go into the details here, but suffice to say that today we're playing a game of cat and mouse when it comes to cybersecurity, whether it's in the financial area or whether it's in healthcare. We're always trying to stay one step ahead of that cat that's chasing us down the aisle. We're always trying to fix holes in our firewalls or in our systems. So how do we leverage the power of, say, pattern recognition and deep learning algorithms to really have predictive analytics that tells you where that next data breach is potentially going to be, right? So there are lots of things that we can do to truly address that. I think culture is really important. I believe wholeheartedly that culture is really at the core of innovating the right way. Today, we're often trying to deal with what I call culture clash. So there's sort of the old world versus the new world that's clashing, right? There's the notion of clinicians and researchers and professors who are taught to go with the tried and tested. That's how I was taught through med school, and as I went through training and as I practiced as well many years ago, I was taught to go with the tried and tested, evidence-based guidelines, best practices, published journals, right? So go with the tried and tested. And then comes the bull, the innovators that say, hey, this is a brand new technology, a brand new way of doing things. Trust me, it'll work. So there's that clash that happens. So how do you leverage that? Because oftentimes, that's what happens, is it just hurts right there. Sometimes we just throw ourselves at it. We're like, just bring it on. just bring it. I think it'll be okay. We'll just bring it. So how do you really leverage that? Because you need to have the right types of capabilities. You need to have the right types of skills in your teams. So even as you work through specific research projects and specific goals that you have in academia and in science, I believe that you need to have the right makeup in your teams, right? You need to have the sprinters, but you also need to have the marathon runners, because that's really critical. And you can't just have the sprinters, and you can't just have the marathon runners. You have to have a good mix of the two of them. So both mode 1 and mode 2 are really critical when it comes to innovation. The flip side to that is, how do you take some of that startup mentality where you have a lot of the marathon runners and the sprinters and put them into the culture of what you do? So that's really important as well. I'll talk really quickly about new care models, and I mentioned this earlier in the snowflake analogy, and I like that better than this complex slide that I'm going to throw at you right now. But it really is about that balance, right? You've got big data analytics that's looking at these large troves of data around populations of patients. I mentioned the populations of diabetics. But sometimes those populations of diabetics also have an intersection with a population of congestive heart failure patients. They also have heart failure. And then they live in certain zip codes. And so there are lots of these complexities. So it's balancing that with what's called big science or omics, right? So proteomics and genomics and all of these omics, so that personalized medicine, that N of 1, that snowflake under that microscope that I referenced earlier. How do we find that right balance? Because in one, if you look at this from a data science perspective, right? A lot of you are in information technology and data science and engineering. If you look at this from an engineering perspective, one is about decreasing the variations, and then the other is really about increasing the variations. And what we need to do is to find that right balance between the two to go into these precise individualized networks so that we can find the right algorithms that'll have the largest impact in the care that we're providing to our patients. So very quickly, I'll walk you through the UPMC story, and then I'll try to wrap up. So this is the new us, as you can all relate to, because you've seen plenty of these, right? So we're at at Pittsburgh, you know that we're not about steel mines and coal mills anymore. And I was afraid 10 years ago when I came from Los Angeles to Pittsburgh that, am I going to be hit with like coal mines and steel mills? But no, I got hit with a city that was on the verge of continuing to really transform and redefine itself. And that's what we've ended up with. But that's fantastic because in the backdrop of the old, we have the new. And I think we're seeing that in education and academia. We're seeing that in robotics and IT and engineering and in healthcare and really across the board, not just in self-driving technologies. So the way that UPMC is organized very quickly is that we have these 4 pillars. One is the insurance services group, and that's the health plan. So a lot of you, when you drive around town in Pittsburgh, you see lots of UPMC signs, right? Right? And a lot of you see, relate to UPMC as maybe that's where my physicians are. If you get care from UPMC facilities, right? So that's where the doctors are. Or that's where I go if I need to get care or a vaccine or whatever. So that's the provider services division. We have 3,800 physicians. We have thousands and thousands of nurses. We have 25 hospitals. The insurance services group, so if there are some of you who get your insurance from UPMC, that's the health plan, right? And there are 3.2 million members that receive insurance from the UPMC health plan. But very few people know that UPMC also has a strong international presence. So I know there's a lot of international students here at RMU. And UPMC has a presence in dozens of countries across the board, including China and India and Kazakhstan. We have hospitals there in Ireland and Italy, and it's just absolutely remarkable. But the 4th pillar is UPMC Enterprises, and that's a very little-known fact. It's a well-kept secret at UPMC, and that's where I normally park my car every morning, is at Bakery Square, which is in East Liberty. And we tap into the rest of the 3 pillars. My charge with innovation is across the 4 pillars, but I'm parked at UPMC Enterprises to really leverage the rest of UPMC. So we're a large organization that has these big numbers that I draw out there. But what I really want to talk to you about is this notion of the complexities in healthcare that I mentioned earlier. So how many of you have read the Time magazine or read Time magazine on a somewhat regular basis, right? I love the magazine because it synthesizes, current events and things into articles that are really meaningful and thought-provoking. Some years back, there was an article called Bitter Pill. So a gentleman by the name of Stephen Brill, he's not a physician, but he'd been through a lot of challenges in healthcare, but he's a prolific author. And he wrote an article saying, Bitter Pill. There are lots and lots of challenges in healthcare. We're doing lots of things wrong in the United States. We're amongst the top 20 countries in the world that spend the most in healthcare, yet we get the least out of the money that we spend in healthcare. Today, at $3.7 trillion, that's the industry in healthcare. So he had a lot to say. So he wrote a book, because that's what you do when you have a lot to say, right? And it's called America's Bitter Pill. So if any of you have an interest in some of the challenges in healthcare and some of the opportunities, this might be a good book to read if you have a lot of patience, because it's 528 pages. But in that book, in the middle of that book, he's critiquing healthcare. He's saying healthcare is really broken in the United States. And in the middle of the book, he says, if you're looking for an example for the future of healthcare, a model for the future of healthcare, look no further than UPMC. He actually calls out UPMC, which I was reading the book and I almost fell off my chair because we didn't pay him to write the book. We wouldn't pay Stephen Brill to write a book. He's a big critic of healthcare. But what he points to is the fact that the future of healthcare really needs to be driven by payers and providers. So providers meaning those physicians, and payers meaning the health plans, the insurance groups, working together, building those bridges. Remember I talked about building bridges, right? Building those bridges, and that's what he talks about, because he believes that if hospital groups on their own try to continue push ahead with healthcare, then costs will continue to escalate because they are motivated to keep patients in the hospitals. They've spent millions building those facilities, millions buying X-ray scanners and MRI scanners, millions building the emergency departments. They want to fill those beds. Insurance plans, on the other hand, they're motivated to basically take your monthly deductibles, your premiums, and keep them, right? They don't want you to spend it. They want you to be well, right? So how do you find that balance between those two things? And that's what he talks about in the book. And in large parts, that's what we're trying to do because we're one of the very few integrated payer-provider systems in the country. And we're trying to say, all right, not just what's in the best interests of the patient or the health plan member, but the person, that N of one, the snowflakes that we're dealing with every day, you and me, right? And that's the notion that we're driving home with. So a lot of opportunities there for sure. So this is Bakery Square, the old Nabisco factory down in East Liberty. It's now been transformed into a tech center. Upstairs from us are 3 floors of really colorful Google offices. You know, it's really nice. It's tough for me because we're competing for talent with Google upstairs. But I tell engineers and others who want to come and work in innovation or in IT, I tell them, look, you can go upstairs and sell ads, or you can come here and save lives. And it works sometimes. It doesn't usually work, but it works sometimes. But it really is a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun even at UPMC Enterprises. I won't bore you with the details. If you go on Twitter and look for hashtag UPMC Innovates, or online at upmcenterprises.com, you'll see a lot of details of some of the things that we're doing. But in our DNA at UPMC, we're an academic hub. We like to work with scientists. We like to work with academicians. We have a strong partnership with the University of Pittsburgh because we are UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. But I'd also like to build bridges out into RMU and other educational establishments across town. I think it's really critical for us to innovate together. We also have a lot of things that we're doing with educational establishments in the area, including the Pittsburgh Health Data Alliance, PHDA, as it's commonly called. A lot of things that we're doing with, for example, data scientists and big data experts from Carnegie Mellon University. I'd love to try to explore if there are opportunities for us to collaborate here at RMU as well. We're big believers in the notion of human-centered design. So in that building at Bakery Square, we have today upwards of about 200, 250 employees working in my team, really looking at all of those challenges of healthcare. But we leverage the principles of human-centered design. So you'll see lots of sticky notes and whiteboards, and we have a lot of fun in innovating and challenging the status quo. These are just examples of companies that we've birthed or companies that we've invested in. So we're also big into entrepreneurship. So we put our money where our mouth is. If we say population health is important, then we also say, all right, here's how to do it. And we work with scientists and professors and entrepreneurs and venture capital groups and IT firms, small, medium, large across the board, and really come up with these companies and innovations that generate revenue and that really move the needle to the next level. So a lot of things go into the success factors, including making sure that we have the right pilot, making sure that we're able to roll out the solutions properly, the systems integration, the workflow, and the growth. So I talked about the top 5 list, and now I'll quickly go back to that list and talk about 5 ways not to get left behind by the innovation bus. This is where I would seek your feedback and see if you agree with some of my notion as well, right? So you remember the top 5 list, correct? Okay, so complexity. I think it's important for us to have focus. I think it's really critical. I talk about how innovation is anything but business as usual. So this is not just in healthcare, but really across the board. Having the right level of focus is really critical to driving the right types of innovations forward. And you know, earlier on, I talked about the hype, right, and the hype cycle. And oftentimes we get blinded, and I think this is true in academia as well, and when we're writing grants and coming up with proposals. You know, there's always these buzzwords that people, you know, tend to latch onto because everyone's talking about big data. Everyone's talking about machine learning, and let me do something in that realm. So it's important not to get blinded by these buzzwords, right? So I love this quote. It says, "We need to learn to set our course by the stars, not by the light of every passing ship." So focus is really important. We talked about the challenge of access to data. So this is where we need to build more bridges. It's really important to build bridges between these silos of information systems that we have, including, so at UPMC we have, can you guess how much data we have? So how many of you think we have less than 1 petabyte worth of data? How many of you think we have 1 to 3 petabytes worth of data? 3 to 5. I'm talking about petabytes, not terabytes or, you know. All right, okay, more than 5 petabytes. Yeah. So yeah, we have upwards of 20 petabytes worth of data, and it's doubling every 18 months. And that's just within UPMC itself. I believe most of the data, as I mentioned earlier, actually exists outside of UPMC. So that's what we need to really go after. So security and privacy, how do we get on the driver's seat, I think is really important. So I talk a lot about technology, but at the same time, innovation, I think, if done right, makes technology invisible. Right, so and it's true for information security. It's true for everything else. Technology should really fade away into the background. And what we should be doing is, as physicians, talking to the patients, as nurses, interacting with our patients, as patients or as persons, making sure that you have the right access to care when and if you need it. But if not, then you have access to the right guidelines that tell you what you need to do to continue to maintain that circle of wellness. Culture is important. We established that earlier. But I think we really need to push forward and be fearless, right? Fearless is what I talk about. It's important for us not just to accept things as they are, but to challenge the status quo. And that's what we encourage at UPMC Enterprises, is to really challenge the status quo and saying, all right, how about if, right? How about if we challenge the notion that healthcare should really just be about getting better from an illness? How about if we did the things this way or this way, right? So being fearless is really important. Remember I talked about the culture clash and that bull charging after the person? So what we do is we leverage that culture clash and turn it on its head. We have clinicians who are not just the end users, or patients who are not just the end users of the product after we've done research on it, after we've created the product, after we've created the company. We finally then deploy the solution and then bring in the end users. We bring in the end users at the very beginning, before even a single line of code is written. So we have clinicians that are sitting down with us at Bakery Square, looking at all of these challenges and together coming up with the solutions. We even have patients working with us and doing that. So that's why we have a lot of these human-centered design type principles at UPMC. Last but not least is designing for tomorrow and leveraging today, right? So making sure that we're able to really rethink the notion of healthcare. Healthcare should not just be about curing disease, it should also be about living. This is a big statement that we make. The presidents of our hospital systems today, they've stood up and challenged me and said, "You're wrong. Dr. Shrestha, you're wrong." Right? Yet I stand up and say, no, I think collectively, if we think about not just healthcare as it exists today, but where it needs to be, this is the reality. And at UPMC, this is what we're building to. We're building to the future where if our beds are filled, it means that we have failed. right? There's a common phrase today in healthcare called heads in beds. That's an actual measure, right? So we're measuring heads in beds, and we shouldn't be doing that. It should really be, how do we make sure that the patient is thriving and not coming into the hospital in the first place? So that's the new us. That's what I believe needs to be done, and the approach that we're taking. But I started off saying, it's really about building bridges, and that's the reason I think we're all here. Pittsburgh is the city that has the most number of bridges in any city internationally. I think we need more bridges. We need more bridges to bridge the old world versus the new world. We need more bridges between the patient and the clinician. We need more bridges between academia and the real world of entrepreneurship and revenue generation. I think we need more bridges between data science and getting to behavior change, which really is the end goal of innovation. So I'll end with that, but I'll open it up for questions, and I can go back to my slides and bring up some of those challenges. But this is really the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
I believe long before Stephen Brill wrote his book, UPMC started a new approach to that. And you mentioned the keyword about integrated payer provider. I want to ask you, is it your opinion that it's a good or better solution? Or could you articulate in some way easier than the big book
Yeah.
that we can easily get on what is the core solution? Why is it better?
Yep, that's a great question, by the way, because that goes to the root of what I believe we need to be doing in the United States. So I established earlier that costs are escalating. Today we spend $3.7 trillion in healthcare as a nation, and we get very little out of it. We're the top spenders in the top 20 countries, yet we're about number 20 in the top 20 countries list when it comes to specific outcomes, so longevity, how long we live. We're amongst the bottom of that top 20 list. So I truly do believe that the integrated payer-provider approach is the right approach. Having said that, how do we actualize that? How do we make it real? On one extreme is sort of a single payer system, right? So there's one payer for the entire country. And it's an approach that the NHS, the National Health System in the United Kingdom, has taken. Several countries like Singapore and others have taken as well. I'm not sure that that's an approach that'll work for the United States because inherently we're very entrepreneurial and competitive in nature. And I think we need to allow for that competition to really make us better, right? And having a number of entities that compete with each other, I think overall can actually work out really well for us. But having said that, I do believe that we need to continue to move to a notion of where physician groups or hospitals are working a lot more closely with payer organizations. Today, there's a us versus them sort of a mentality. And I'm not saying that every group needs to be like UPMC, where there's an integrated delivery network. But provider organizations need to work much more cohesively with insurance groups and payer organizations. And we're starting to see some of these propagate. So Geisinger on the other side of Pennsylvania and the network of hospitals around Geisinger are also a payer provider. Kaiser, right? So they're in the other part of the country, and they're also an integrated payer provider system. The VA, the Veterans Administration, they're the largest payer provider system. And when you look at some of these examples, you see a lot of what I'm talking about here, what Stephen Brill talks about in his book. So at the end of the day, it really is about payers and providers working much more cohesively together, sharing data, but really striving towards thriving as opposed to just surviving, which is the crux of my message. We'll get right. at the back. Thank you. After you,
Yeah,
please.
when you mentioned petabytes, I had
Yes.
to look it up.
A lot of zeros.
So now it's 1 million gigabytes.
Yes, yes.
Well, I'm just a humble patient, and I use UPMC Health Track, which I really love. I did notice that whenever I would go to a UPMC provider or a non-UPMC provider, it doesn't make a difference. While you're waiting for the doctor to see you, they give you papers so you can update your list of medications. And each time I would cross out, I'm no longer on this antibiotic, I'm no longer taking this hydrocortisone, you know, things that are prescribed just for a particular short period of time. And I expect that it would be put into my medical record, but it's not. So next time I see another provider, I do the same thing. A very simple step is not being done.
Yep.
And I was thinking maybe the patient can do it through UPMC Health Track,
Yeah.
but that would only be for UPMC health providers. The health track is not linked to non-UPMC health providers.
Correct.
Maybe
Yep.
we can start at that basic
Yeah.
data gathering and reduce the petabytes that you have to deal with.
You're absolutely right. And you've essentially exemplified the synthesis of the top 5 challenges that I articulated earlier, right from complexity all the way down through the list. And that's the reality of healthcare. It's true not just for UPMC, but for other organizations as well, is you've got these silos that aren't talking to each other. You've got, you know, the mix of digital with culture of analog. So we're still giving you clipboards with pencils and pens. We are changing that gradually. At UPMC, we are creating innovations that will make a difference. So you'll see in the next year or so specific technologies that are getting rolled out where, and we already have pilots of this that have been ongoing at certain hospitals or physician practices where you're actually given a tablet, an actual tablet, a digital tablet with a touch-sensitive pen. And all you're doing is you're updating directly into the record. And there's a patient view of the record that we're dealing with. So my physician actually uses the digital tablet today. So we're going to be rolling that out on a much broader scale. The other problem that you spoke to is that about Health Track and the portal, right? The portal that you interact with. And there's an ongoing effort at UPMC where, you know, we have actually multiple portals. We have 4 or 5 separate portals. And this is true for other healthcare organizations as well. Part of what we're doing is to combine all of this into one view that really is about you, right? And regardless of whether you're seeing a UPMC physician or not, you'll have access to that one portal that'll be linked to all of the systems, transparent to you. So that's an active project that's going on right now. But yeah, it's a work in progress. I'm not here to profess and tell you that we're perfect. We're far less than perfect. It's for that reason that we have a lot of these innovations. But I can tell you that from an innovation perspective, we're actually leading the charge. When you look at other healthcare establishments across the country, they have very similar challenges and very similar pain points, but not quite the same type of innovations that we're playing around with and creating. But your examples are spot on. It's exactly what we need to be doing and addressing.
Oh, Dr. Tresha, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
You mentioned earlier the painstaking process in terms of the U.S. adoption rate
Yes.
among EHR with physicians. Where are we currently in terms of adoption rate? Because I know from my own research, that number has been quite low and is steadily going up as a result of the HITECH Act.
Yes.
But where are we currently in terms of adoption rate, not only here in the Pittsburgh market, but in comparison to the national market? And I know Kaiser Permanente is one of the leaders in that arena. If you could just speak to that briefly.
Absolutely. So the HITECH Act that was essentially put in place, some years back, about 8-9 years ago, provided a set of incentives. I call it a carrot and stick act. There was a lot of carrots in place, whereas in the first X number of years, if you implemented electronic medical record systems and moved away from paper charts, you would actually get from the federal government $44,000 per physician. So if you had a practice with 2 physicians, that's $88,000. If you had 10, just keep on multiplying. If you had 100 or 1,000, right? So there were lots of incentives built into that. There's also penalties that are now coming into play. So in the next couple of years, you'll start seeing a lot of folks getting penalized. And a lot of people waited until the very end. So we've seen a dramatic growth in physician groups adopting electronic health record systems. And there's actually been a very positive upward trend to the point where today we're about 89–90% of physician practices nationally have adopted electronic health record systems. But there's still a good chunk of practices that haven't. But yeah, so that's the statistics today.
Thank you, Dr. Shrestha, for your presentation. It's really inspiring and the work that you are doing. I've just got a few questions and comments. One is, over the last 5 months here at RMU, we've been having some discussions that revolve around the high increases in healthcare costs. Mm-hmm. And you've touched a number of ways of how you have identified those. Now, given the pandemics that we're having countrywide and worldwide, and the chronic disease conditions that are also accompanying these seem to be increasing as well, where do you see the cutting of these costs should take place? Following up on that is the fact that I was looking at the pie chart on the expenditures, where the money is going. So if you want to cut costs, probably the most logical thing for one to do is to go to where the money is spent. Mm-hmm. And then you can cut costs there. What you meet when you are at that point is another matter. So where do you see these costs being cut, knowing the fact that if these beds are filled more and more in hospital, then you are failing, and given the fact that the electronic patient records, and I'm not particularly worried about the electronic patient record spending a lot of time designing it, and 40% or 44%, as you've mentioned, because once you've got that behind you, you are on your way to efficiencies. So the private hospitals and the funders, where do you have this cost cut?
Yeah, it's a great question. Clearly, it's unsustainable, right? Today, healthcare is about. Does anyone know this? What percentage of our GDP is spent in healthcare? A little more than 15. It's close to about 18%. So we're one of the highest in the world. In fact, the highest in the world when it comes to the spend. So that's a lot of money that's being spent in healthcare. I was interacting with the Minister of Health from Singapore some months back. We were at a meeting in Provo, Utah, of all places. Singapore, Pittsburgh. We meet in Provo, Utah, and she was complaining, and she was saying, "Oh, Dr. Shrestha, we're really struggling. With 4% of our GDP being spent on healthcare." I said, "All right, So you're hitting on a sore spot. You're hitting exactly what the place that we need to be addressing. There are lots and lots of opportunities to cut costs, but it can't start without us challenging the status quo and addressing those facets that I talked about in terms of culture, for example, right? Because today we are rewarding the wrong things, and you get what you reward more of, right? You get what you incentivize more of, and today we're incentivizing value-based care. That's what we're doing, and there's this march that we're on right now from volume to value. So today we're incentivizing volume-based care, right? So it's volume-based. How many studies did I, as a radiologist, perform today? How many beds did I fill? How many patients did I see today? It's all volume-based, and we're rewarding that, right? What we need to be rewarding is value. Things like outcomes and satisfaction. and making sure that we're actually not spending our time in the hospital. So we're building a set of capabilities to, first and foremost, identify where the maximum costs are today in healthcare, and secondly, trying to reward the right sets of incentives and motivators. So we will be rewarding hospital groups for making sure that their patients don't come back in 30 days after they've been discharged, 60 days after they've been discharged, 90 days after they've been discharged. And it's actually called 30-day readmit scores or 60-day. These are scores that we're measuring now, and soon we'll be incentivizing more and more as well. So we're changing those parameters. We're changing the way that we're incentivizing our healthcare groups across the board. But then I think more important than even that is really the notion of looking at the practices that we currently have and using the power of data and the great research work that many of you are doing to really try to make a difference in using data to make decisions more intelligent. Right? So today, as an example, when you go in for, say, a knee replacement procedure or a hip replacement procedure, by our calculations, anywhere from 70 to 90% of the things that go into prep for that joint replacement surgery is actually waste. So that's a lot of waste that exists. But by today's systems that we currently have, you have to do those things so that we have the right parts available, that we have the right levels of readiness for that patient who's about to go through a major surgical procedure. But if we're able to leverage the power of data and analytics and insights and get to decision points that are much more meaningful, we'll be able to replace most of those costs and wastage for those surgical procedures. And the same thing exists for a number of other things. So at UPMC Enterprises, we're doing a lot of really interesting things around supply chain and supply chain management. And you don't think about healthcare and supply chain together in the same breath, but there's a lot of waste in the delivery of these types of applications that we're tracking through supply chain. So we're trying to bring some of the algorithms that Amazon uses in their data warehouses, right? And using that to actually track some of the inventories, the millions of SKUs that we're dealing with on a day in, day out basis in healthcare. So bringing some of those, big data, machine learning type capabilities and enabling for us to make more intelligent decisions is really the route to weeding out the costs and the wastage that exists in healthcare. Great question, thank you.
Okay, we have time for one more question. I'm going to go in the back, okay? Maybe we can do two more.
Thanks so much. This has been great. This is
Thank you.
I'm here taking notes like a student all over again. So recently on NPR, those of you who listen to NPR, there was a story that came out through a show called Marketplace, and they talk about robot-proof jobs. And the gentleman was basically posing the question, in this era of advanced technology where the expectation is that many of our jobs will be replaced by advancement in tech innovation, are there jobs that actually that does not affect? And so in that same line, I kind of now refer the question to advancements within healthcare. I make the assumption that many of these strides of innovation very much are technologically facilitated or at least incorporate some sort of technological change. But are you seeing within your time at UPMC where there are some changes that you realized are better without technology? If there's aspects of UPMC being more innovative where technology actually impeded or hindered that progress, and you're seeing now innovation without technology being more fruitful?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a really insightful question, and coming from a fellow innovator and entrepreneur, that's saying a lot. So yes is the answer. While we have lots of robots across UPMC, so for example, we have robots that we use to do surgical procedures. We have to help us with surgical procedures. We have robots in our big pharmacies that are going in and really just going after and getting the right medications for the right patients and distributing them. It's amazing. We have robots that are in some of our hospitals going around and greeting patients. And they actually stand out of the way if a doctor is walking around or a nurse is rounding. It's amazing. It's really great. But at the same time, to your point, if all you have is a hammer, then you're always searching for that nail, right? Everything looks like a nail. Everything does, right? So technology is not the only answer to getting innovation right. And part of what we try to do is really look at the entire span of innovation. And today I focused primarily on health IT innovation and what we're doing around entrepreneurship in that realm. But there's process innovation, there is clinical innovation, there's a lot of innovation in science and medicine, in specific procedural innovation in the way that we're dealing with transplants, for example, in how we're looking at Six Sigma and black belt type capabilities to look at workflow. That doesn't always involve technology. In fact, oftentimes it doesn't include technology. There are lots of things that we are continuing to push for in encouraging the voice of the patient, for example, right? And encouraging things like empathy. And I talk a lot about, it's going to be a while before we algorithmize empathy. And so it's really important for us to just pause. I talk about, so I'm fairly active on Twitter as well. You might have seen hashtags everywhere in my slides. That's my Twitter handle, @Rasu just first name, last name. And I talk a lot on Twitter and social media about how, for us, it's really important to disconnect, because we're always connected. We always have our smartphone, we have our Fitbits, we have all these devices that we're connected to all the time. And as connected as we are, we're also so disconnected, right? We're very disconnected from sometimes our patients, sometimes our loved ones, sometimes our friends and relatives. So it's really important, and we push for this through various exercises and innovations that we're pushing for at UPMC. And we say it's really important for us to disconnect to connect, right? So that's a great question, and thank you for asking that.
Okay, it is 1:30. We will have to stop here. I do apologize for the two colleagues that we could not give the mic to, but I'm going to ask the students here. Okay, do the students have any question for Dr. Shrestha? Okay, if you have any questions, I'm giving you an opportunity to ask. Okay, this is the last question.
Okay, all right, that's great. You're a true professor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shrestha. So my question is about, you said that the healthcare really focus on the patients, and the IT versus the innovation leads the healthcare. So what I'm looking at here is the patient itself. For me, I've never been allowed to gather my data about.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I've never been allowed to gather my data about my healthcare data. So if I went to a hospital, I open a file there, I leave it there.
Mm-hmm.
I go to another hospital, another file, as the woman said. But that's kind of hindering to me.
Yep.
And my question is there any innovation up to come, giving us the access to our data?
I love that a student is asking this question, because they really are our future. And I truly believe that the very question that you asked, the answer to that question is the future of healthcare. Today, part of the challenge that we have in healthcare around interoperability and around complexity is really as a result of us not liberating that data, not freeing that data, right? It's locked away in those silos that I referenced earlier. Also, we have the wrong incentive models. We're incentivizing the vendors of these electronic health record systems to really propagate more of their silos, right? And we need to be incentivizing them to free the data, to have open APIs, for them to have the right levels of adherence to data standards and open RESTful type APIs like FHIR, F-H-I-R is a standard. If you look it up, and HL7 is a standard. So there are these standards that we're really trying to propagate. So there are things that we're doing and innovations that we have today that allow for patients to directly get access to their data. Did you know that all healthcare records, your healthcare records, actually belong to you and not to the healthcare establishment, right? So they belong to you. Healthcare organizations and these silos merely hold the data safely for you. But when you ask for a copy of your records, you should get access to it. Sometimes they print it out and they give you films. At UPMC, we give you CDs and we give you electronic formats as well, and we make it available on your portal if you ask for it. Even if you're migrating to some other state or getting a second opinion. But I truly do believe that the future of healthcare is going to be where we not depend on the vendors of the electronic health records for interoperability, but we actually allow for patients to be the arbitrators of their own data. We give you full access to your data so that at a click of a button, you get access to that data. And then we allow for the patient to correct, for example, if you're not on a certain hydrocortisone, you should be able to correct it. And the physician will, or the pharmacist will validate it, right, and make sure that that's updated immediately. So giving patients access and control, right, empowerment, I mentioned earlier, empowering patients, that's the movement that we're actually pushing for at UPMC Enterprises as well. If you Google the term blue button for healthcare, this is a federally mandated sort of an innovation that's being pushed forward. It's called the blue button strategy. So there are these systems where you have a blue button, you click the blue button, you're actually able to download the health data that belongs to you. Now, not for your others, your friends, you can't download their data, but your data you can. So that is the movement that the industry is marching towards. I want for us to get there sooner. I don't want for us to get there in 10, 20 years. I want for us to get there in the next year or 2 years. So if you're interested, let's talk, because it sounds like you have lots of great ideas. Thank you.
Okay, just before we end, I'd like to say for our students, we have our technical recruiter. In fact, let me correct that, rephrase that. Talent recruiter from UPMC Enterprise. Okay, he will be in one of our rooms out there, the smaller rooms, and you would want to stay outside in line and meet him one by one. Share your resume, ask him questions. He'll be happy to help you. He'll stay as long as we have students.
Yep.
Right? I'd also like to ask Lisa. Lisa, can you come up in the front, please? So as you know, Lisa is from my office, and she's been instrumental in putting this whole event together. So in appreciation for Dr. Shrestha coming and delivering this keynote address, we like to give him, I think Lisa would like to, okay, a small appreciation. Okay, so thank you so much for being here. Okay, thank you all for coming. We'll have another Research and Grants Expo next year. Hope to see you guys next year. Thank you so much. Of course, early.